Question 1. Consider a scenario where an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria expresses significant concern about providing detailed personal information, citing privacy worries, and requests to know the exact legal justification for each piece of data requested beyond basic identification. What is the most appropriate professional response from the issuing authority? Option A. Clearly explain the specific legal provisions under Austrian law, e.g., Waffengesetz and relevant data protection regulations, that mandate the collection of each piece of requested information, assure the applicant of secure data handling protocols, and offer alternative secure methods for submission if available. Option B. Deny the application immediately due to the applicant's unwillingness to provide complete information, citing the need for full disclosure for security purposes. Option C. Proceed with processing the application based on the limited information provided, assuming the applicant's privacy concerns outweigh the need for complete data verification. Option D. Inform the applicant that providing all requested information is a non-negotiable requirement and that their privacy concerns cannot be accommodated beyond general data protection principles. The correct answer is A. Clearly explain the specific legal provisions under Austrian law e.g., Waffengesetz and relevant data protection regulations that mandate the collection of each piece of requested information, assure the applicant of secure data handling protocols, and offer alternative secure methods for submission if available. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to privacy and the legal obligations of an authority to ensure public safety and compliance with firearms regulations in Austria. The applicant's reluctance to disclose sensitive personal information, coupled with the potential for legitimate security concerns, requires a careful and legally sound approach that respects both individual rights and the public interest. Misinterpreting or mishandling such a situation could lead to legal repercussions for the authority, erosion of public trust, and potentially compromise public safety. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves clearly communicating the legal basis for requesting the additional information, explaining its necessity for processing the Waffenpass application, and offering the applicant the opportunity to provide the information in a secure and confidential manner. This aligns with Austrian data protection laws, Datenschutzgesetz DSG, and the principles of administrative procedure, which mandate transparency and lawful processing of personal data. By explaining the why and ensuring secure handling, the authority demonstrates respect for the applicant's rights while fulfilling its statutory duty. This approach fosters cooperation and builds trust, increasing the likelihood of a successful and compliant application. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach is to immediately deny the application solely based on the applicant's initial reluctance without further inquiry or explanation. This fails to uphold the principle of proportionality and the right to be heard, which are fundamental in Austrian administrative law. It also ignores the possibility that the applicant may have valid privacy concerns that can be addressed through appropriate data handling procedures. Another incorrect approach is to proceed with processing the application without obtaining the necessary information, assuming the applicant's initial statement is sufficient. This directly contravenes the requirements of the Waffengesetz (WAFG) and associated regulations, which mandate thorough vetting and verification for firearms permits. Such an oversight could lead to the issuance of a Waffenpass to an individual who may pose a risk, thereby jeopardizing public safety and violating the law. A further incorrect approach involves pressuring the applicant to disclose information through coercive or misleading tactics. This is ethically unacceptable and violates the principles of good governance and respect for individual autonomy. It also risks creating a situation where the applicant feels unfairly treated, potentially leading to legal challenges and damage to the reputation of the issuing authority. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this situation should adopt a structured decision-making process. First, they must identify the specific legal requirements for the Waffenpass application under Austrian law, including any provisions related to data collection and privacy. Second, they should assess the applicant's stated concerns and determine if they are legitimate and addressable within the legal framework. Third, they should communicate clearly and transparently with the applicant, explaining the legal basis for information requests and outlining secure methods for data submission. Finally, they must ensure all actions taken are documented and comply with relevant data protection and administrative laws. Question 2. During the evaluation of an application for a Waffenpass in Austria, an applicant states their primary motivation is participation in competitive sport shooting, but also expresses a general interest in firearm ownership for personal security. What is the most appropriate course of action for the issuing authority to ensure compliance with Austrian weapons law? Option A. Grant the Waffenpass immediately, given the applicant's apparent good character and their mention of sport shooting as a secondary interest. Option B. Accept the applicant's declaration of intent to join a shooting club and begin the process of obtaining a firearm for sport shooting in the near future. Option C. Issue the Waffenpass based on the applicant's stated interest in personal security, assuming their sport shooting mention indicates a potential future use. Option D. Request official documentation from a recognized Austrian shooting club confirming the applicant's active membership and participation in sport shooting activities, alongside a comprehensive assessment of their personal suitability as per legal requirements. The correct answer is D. Request official documentation from a recognized Austrian shooting club confirming the applicant's active membership and participation in sport shooting activities, alongside a comprehensive assessment of their personal suitability as per legal requirements. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm for sport shooting with the stringent requirements of Austrian weapons law, specifically the Waffenpass. The issuing authority must exercise careful judgment to ensure public safety while adhering to legal provisions. The core of the challenge lies in verifying the genuine and consistent need for a firearm for sport, as opposed to a superficial or temporary interest, and ensuring the applicant meets all personal suitability criteria. The best approach involves a thorough and documented verification process of the applicant's stated sport shooting activities. This includes requesting official confirmation from a recognized shooting club or federation detailing the applicant's membership duration, participation in competitions, and the specific disciplines they engage in. Furthermore, this approach necessitates a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's personal suitability, which, under Austrian law, includes checks on their reliability, mental and physical fitness, and absence of any grounds for refusal, e.g., criminal record, signs of addiction. This detailed, evidence-based verification directly aligns with the principles of responsible firearm licensing, ensuring that a Waffenpass is issued only to individuals who demonstrably meet the legal requirements for a legitimate and ongoing need for a firearm for sport shooting, and are deemed suitable to possess one. An incorrect approach would be to rely solely on the applicant's self-declaration of intent to join a shooting club in the future. This fails to provide concrete evidence of an established and ongoing need for a firearm for sport shooting, which is a fundamental requirement for obtaining a Waffenpass. Austrian law requires more than just a future intention. It demands proof of current engagement. Another incorrect approach would be to issue the Waffenpass based on the applicant's stated desire to own a firearm for self-defense, even if they also mention sport shooting. Austrian weapons law strictly distinguishes between the reasons for firearm possession. A Waffenpass is specifically for sport shooting, hunting, or collecting, not for general self-defense, which has different legal pathways and requirements, if any, for firearm ownership. Finally, an incorrect approach would be to expedite the process by overlooking the requirement for a formal assessment of personal suitability, such as mental and physical fitness, simply because the applicant appears to be a law-abiding citizen. The legal framework mandates these checks to ensure public safety, and bypassing them constitutes a significant regulatory failure. Professionals should employ a systematic decision-making process that prioritizes adherence to legal requirements and public safety. This involves meticulously reviewing all submitted documentation, conducting thorough background checks, verifying the applicant's stated needs through independent sources, and ensuring all statutory criteria for personal suitability are met and documented. Any deviation from these established procedures, particularly those that compromise the integrity of the verification process or public safety, must be avoided. Question 3. Research into an application for a Waffenpass in Austria reveals that the applicant has declared past incidents of domestic disputes with a former partner, though no formal charges were ever filed. The applicant has provided a written statement asserting these disputes were minor and have no bearing on their current suitability. What is the most responsible and legally compliant course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Expedite the processing of the Waffenpass application by focusing solely on the formal requirements and overlooking the details of the domestic dispute declarations. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's statement regarding domestic disputes, and seek further information or clarification if the provided details are insufficient to definitively assess personal reliability and public safety risk. Option C. Accept the applicant's written statement at face value and proceed with the Waffenpass application, as no formal charges were filed. Option D. Dismiss the domestic dispute allegations as irrelevant to the Waffenpass application since no criminal convictions are present. Correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's statement regarding domestic disputes, and seek further information or clarification if the provided details are insufficient to definitively assess personal reliability and public safety risk. Explanation. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms ownership and the strict legal framework governing it in Austria. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in formal charges, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to possess a weapon. The Waffenpass Weapons Act in Austria places a strong emphasis on the applicant's reliability and the absence of factors that could indicate a risk to public safety. A superficial review of documentation, without considering the underlying context of the applicant's personal history, would be a failure to exercise due diligence. The correct approach involves a thorough and critical evaluation of the applicant's entire submitted documentation, paying particular attention to any information that might indicate a lack of personal reliability or a potential risk. This includes scrutinizing the provided statements regarding domestic disputes and cross-referencing them with any available official records or publicly accessible information that might corroborate or contradict the applicant's claims. The Austrian Weapons Act, Waffengesetz, requires authorities to assess the applicant's personal suitability, which extends beyond mere formal compliance. The presence of documented domestic disputes, even without a conviction, can be a significant indicator of potential unreliability and a risk to public safety, necessitating further investigation or a refusal of the application. This approach aligns with the principle of responsible firearms administration, prioritizing public safety over administrative expediency. An incorrect approach would be to accept the applicant's self-declaration at face value without any independent verification or deeper inquiry into the domestic dispute allegations. This fails to meet the legal requirement of assessing personal reliability and could lead to the issuance of a Waffenpass to an individual who poses a potential risk. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the domestic dispute allegations as irrelevant because no formal charges were filed. While formal charges are a strong indicator, the absence of them does not automatically equate to personal reliability, especially in the context of potential domestic violence. The law requires a broader assessment of suitability. Finally, an approach that prioritizes processing speed over thoroughness, by simply ticking boxes on a form without considering the implications of the information provided, is a clear dereliction of duty and a violation of the spirit and letter of the Austrian Weapons Act. Professionals in this field must adopt a risk-based decision-making framework. This involves understanding the legal requirements, identifying potential red flags in an application, conducting appropriate due diligence to investigate those red flags, and making a reasoned decision based on the totality of the evidence, always prioritizing public safety. Question 4. Governance review demonstrates that an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has provided documentation asserting a need for a firearm for sport shooting. However, a preliminary background check reveals a past conviction for a minor offense that occurred over a decade ago and is unrelated to violence or weapons. What is the most professionally sound approach for the issuing authority to take? Option A. Immediately approve the Waffenpass application as the stated need is for sport shooting and the past offense is minor and unrelated. Option B. Conduct a thorough verification of the applicant's stated need for sport shooting. Perform a comprehensive background check for any current disqualifying factors as per the WAF-G and assess their psychological suitability before making a decision. Option C. Delegate the entire decision-making process to a private security firm specializing in firearms licensing to assess the applicant's suitability. Option D. Deny the Waffenpass application outright due to the past conviction, regardless of its nature or age. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough verification of the applicant's stated need for sport shooting. perform a comprehensive background check for any current disqualifying factors as per the WAF-G, and assess their psychological suitability before making a decision. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the sensitive nature of firearms ownership and the legal obligations associated with it. The core difficulty lies in balancing the applicant's right to seek a Waffenpass with the stringent requirements and potential risks outlined in Austrian firearms law. A thorough and objective assessment is paramount, requiring the official to navigate complex legal provisions and exercise sound judgment to prevent potential misuse of firearms while upholding due process. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a meticulous and comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, cross-referencing it against the specific requirements of the Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WAF-G. This includes verifying the applicant's stated need for the firearm, their psychological suitability, and their criminal record, as mandated by sections like Section 8 WAF-G concerning the prerequisites for obtaining a firearms license. The official must also conduct a thorough background check, including consulting relevant databases and potentially interviewing the applicant or referees, to ensure no disqualifying factors are present. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework, prioritizes public safety, and ensures a fair and objective assessment based on established criteria. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting the Waffenpass based solely on the applicant's assertion of a legitimate need without independent verification. This fails to meet the evidentiary requirements of the WAF-G, specifically the obligation to demonstrate a compelling reason for firearm possession beyond mere personal preference or generalized self-defense concerns. It creates a significant risk of a firearm falling into the wrong hands, violating the public safety mandate. Another incorrect approach is to deny the application summarily due to a minor, unrelated past infraction that has no bearing on the applicant's current suitability or the criteria outlined in the WAF-G. This demonstrates a failure to apply the law judiciously and could constitute an arbitrary or discriminatory decision, potentially leading to legal challenges and undermining public trust in the fairness of the process. The law requires a consideration of specific disqualifying factors, not a blanket rejection based on irrelevant history. A further incorrect approach is to delegate the entire assessment to a third party without retaining oversight or conducting an independent review of their findings. While external expertise might be utilized, the ultimate responsibility for the decision rests with the issuing authority. This abdication of responsibility bypasses the legal requirement for the designated official to make an informed decision based on their own assessment of the evidence and the law. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a systematic and evidence-based decision-making process. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the relevant legal framework, WAF-G in Austria. 2. Objectively evaluating all submitted evidence against these legal requirements. 3. Conducting necessary due diligence and background checks. 4. Documenting all findings and the rationale for the decision. 5. Ensuring the decision is fair, consistent, and legally defensible. This structured approach minimizes the risk of error and upholds the integrity of the firearms licensing process. Question 5. Benchmark analysis indicates that a client's Austrian Waffenpass is due for renewal in 3 months. The client has been a responsible firearm owner for many years and has always renewed their pass without issue. What is the most professional and legally compliant course of action for the firearms dealer? Option A. Assume the client's eligibility remains unchanged and process the renewal without requiring updated documentation, as they have a long history of compliance. Option B. Inform the client that renewal is automatic and no further action is required from their end. Option C. Proactively contact the client, inform them of the upcoming expiry, and provide a comprehensive list of required documentation and the renewal process according to Austrian law, advising them to submit their application well in advance. Option D. Wait for the client to contact the dealership regarding the renewal and process it based on their previous application details. The correct answer is C. Proactively contact the client, inform them of the upcoming expiry, and provide a comprehensive list of required documentation and the renewal process according to Austrian law, advising them to submit their application well in advance. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Austrian firearms dealer due to the strict regulations surrounding the issuance and renewal of Waffenpass. The core difficulty lies in balancing the legal requirements for renewal with the potential for a change in an applicant's circumstances that might affect their eligibility. A dealer must exercise due diligence to ensure compliance with the Waffengesetz, Weapons Act, and associated ordinances, while also avoiding undue burden on legitimate firearm owners. The risk of inadvertently facilitating the possession of a firearm by an ineligible individual, or conversely, unjustly denying a renewal, necessitates a meticulous and informed approach. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves proactively informing the applicant about the upcoming expiry of their Waffenpass and clearly outlining the necessary documentation and procedures for renewal, as stipulated by Austrian law. This includes advising them to submit their application well in advance of the expiry date and to be prepared to provide evidence of continued eligibility, such as proof of a valid reason for possessing firearms and a clean criminal record. This approach ensures the applicant is fully aware of their responsibilities and the legal framework, thereby minimizing the risk of noncompliance and facilitating a smooth renewal process. It aligns with the principle of responsible firearm ownership and the dealer's duty to uphold the law. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to simply wait for the applicant to initiate the renewal process without any proactive communication. This fails to meet the professional standard of assisting clients with complex regulatory requirements and could lead to an expired Waffenpass, potentially resulting in legal repercussions for the individual. It also neglects the dealer's role in promoting lawful firearm possession. Another incorrect approach is to assume continued eligibility based on past possession and to process the renewal without verifying current circumstances or reminding the applicant of the need for updated documentation. This bypasses the legal requirement to assess eligibility at the time of renewal and could inadvertently lead to an ineligible person retaining their Waffenpass, which is a direct contravention of the Waffengesetz. A further incorrect approach is to provide the applicant with incomplete or misleading information about the renewal process, such as suggesting that a simple declaration of continued intent is sufficient without mentioning the need for updated proof of eligibility. This demonstrates a lack of understanding or disregard for the specific requirements of the Waffengesetz and could lead the applicant to believe they have fulfilled their obligations when they have not. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and informed stance. When dealing with regulated items like firearms and their associated permits, the decision-making process should prioritize adherence to the specific legal framework of Austria. This involves understanding the full scope of the Waffengesetz and its implications for permit issuance and renewal. Professionals should establish clear internal procedures for tracking permit expiry dates and initiating communication with clients well in advance. Furthermore, they must be equipped to provide accurate, up-to-date information regarding all required documentation and eligibility criteria. When in doubt about an applicant's eligibility or the interpretation of a specific legal provision, seeking clarification from the relevant authorities or legal counsel is paramount. The overarching principle is to facilitate lawful compliance while rigorously upholding public safety and the integrity of the regulatory system. Question 6. Benchmark analysis indicates a firearms dealer in Vienna, Austria, is processing an application for a Waffenpass. The applicant claims to be a collector of antique firearms and has provided a letter from a private collectors association stating their membership. What is the most critical step the dealer must take to ensure compliance with the Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WaffG, regarding the applicant's stated reason for possession? Option A. Accept the letter from the collectors association as sufficient proof of a legitimate reason for firearm possession, assuming all antique firearms are generally permissible for collectors. Option B. Verify the applicant's membership in the Collectors Association and ascertain if the specific antique firearms they intend to acquire are legally permissible for collectors under the WaffG, requiring official documentation of their collector's status and the specific firearms' legality. Option C. Request additional personal references from the applicant to corroborate their claim of being a collector, without independently verifying the legality of the specific firearms. Option D. Advise the applicant that their membership in a collectors association automatically satisfies the WaffG's requirements for a legitimate reason and proceed with the application. The correct answer is B. Verify the applicant's membership in the Collectors Association and ascertain if the specific antique firearms they intend to acquire are legally permissible for collectors under the WAF-G, requiring official documentation of their collector status and the specific firearms legality. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Austrian firearms dealer due to the strict regulatory environment surrounding the issuance and maintenance of a Waffenpass. The core difficulty lies in balancing the legal obligations of the dealer with the applicant's right to possess a firearm, while meticulously adhering to the Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WAF-G, and associated ordinances. Misinterpreting or overlooking any requirement can lead to severe legal repercussions, including fines, license revocation, and criminal charges, as well as ethical breaches concerning public safety. The dealer must exercise extreme diligence in verifying all documentation and ensuring the applicant meets all ongoing criteria for firearm ownership. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, multifaceted verification process that directly addresses the requirements outlined in the WAF-G. This includes meticulously checking the applicant's identity, confirming their age, and critically, verifying the existence and validity of a legitimate reason for firearm possession, as stipulated by Austrian law, e.g., hunting, sport shooting, collection. Furthermore, it necessitates confirming the applicant possesses the requisite permits or licenses for the specific type of firearm they intend to acquire, and that they have not been disqualified due to criminal convictions or mental health concerns as per WAF-G provisions. This comprehensive approach ensures full compliance with legal mandates and upholds the principle of responsible firearm distribution. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves accepting the applicant's self-declaration of a legitimate reason for possession without seeking independent verification or requiring supporting documentation. This fails to meet the WAF-G's requirement for a demonstrable and lawful purpose, potentially allowing firearms to fall into the hands of individuals who do not meet the legal criteria, thereby compromising public safety and violating the dealer's due diligence obligations. Another flawed approach is to overlook the requirement for the applicant to possess a valid firearms license or permit for the specific weapon category they wish to purchase. The WAF-G clearly delineates different permit requirements based on firearm type. Failing to confirm this specific permit means the dealer is facilitating an illegal acquisition, directly contravening the law. A third unacceptable approach is to proceed with the transaction based solely on the applicant's assurance that they have no disqualifying criminal record or mental health issues, without actively seeking confirmation through official channels where legally permissible and required. The WAF-G mandates checks for such disqualification to prevent firearms from being acquired by individuals deemed a risk. Relying on mere assurance is a significant dereliction of duty. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a proactive and systematic approach to compliance. This involves understanding the specific provisions of the Austrian WAF-G, maintaining up-to-date knowledge of any amendments, and establishing robust internal procedures for verifying all applicant information. When in doubt, seeking clarification from relevant authorities or legal counsel is paramount. The decision-making process should prioritize public safety and strict adherence to the law above all else, ensuring that every transaction is legally sound and ethically responsible. Question. Benchmark analysis indicates a firearms dealer in Vienna, Austria, is processing an application for a Waffenpass. The applicant claims to be a collector of antique firearms and has provided a letter from a private collectors association stating their membership. What is the most critical step the dealer must take to ensure compliance with the Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz WAF-G, regarding the applicant's stated reason for possession? Options. A. Verify the applicant's membership in the Collectors Association and ascertain if the specific antique firearms they intend to acquire are legally permissible for collectors under the WAF-G, requiring official documentation of their collector's status and the specific firearms legality. B. Accept the letter from the Collectors Association as sufficient proof of a legitimate reason for firearm possession, assuming all antique firearms are generally permissible for collectors. C. Advise the applicant that their membership in a collectors association automatically satisfies the WAF-G's requirements for a legitimate reason and proceed with the application. D. Request additional personal references from the applicant to corroborate their claim of being a collector, without independently verifying the legality of the specific firearms. Question 7. The control framework reveals that an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has a documented history of 2 minor altercations occurring over a 5-year period, both resulting in minor fines. The applicant states they have not been involved in any further incidents in the last 3 years and expresses a desire to obtain a firearm for sport shooting. What is the most professionally sound approach for the issuing authority to take? Option A. Prove the Waffenpass application without further investigation, considering the applicant's stated intent for sport shooting and the minor nature of the past fines. Option B. Automatically deny the Waffenpass application due to the presence of past altercations, regardless of their severity or recency, as this indicates a potential lack of reliability. Option C. Focus solely on the applicant's current desire for sport shooting and disregard the past altercations as irrelevant to their present suitability for firearm ownership. Option D. Conduct a detailed review of the nature and context of the past altercations. Assess the applicant's current behavior and any evidence of rehabilitation, and determine reliability based on the totality of circumstances in accordance with the Austrian Firearms Act. Correct answer is D. Conduct a detailed review of the nature and context of the past altercations. Assess the applicant's current behavior and any evidence of rehabilitation, and determine reliability based on the totality of circumstances in accordance with the Austrian Firearms Act. Explanation. The control framework reveals a scenario where an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has a history of minor altercations. This presents a professional challenge because the assessment of an applicant's suitability for a firearms license requires balancing the applicant's right to potentially own a firearm with the public safety imperative. The Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz, mandates that applicants must be deemed reliable, zuverlässig, and possess the necessary aptitude, Befähigung. Reliability, in particular, is assessed based on the applicant's character and past conduct, and minor altercations, while not automatically disqualifying, necessitate careful consideration of their frequency, severity, and the applicant's current disposition. The decision requires a nuanced judgment, avoiding overly broad assumptions while upholding the law's intent to prevent firearms from falling into the wrong hands. The best professional approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's entire history and current circumstances. This includes reviewing the details of the past altercations, understanding the context, and evaluating the applicant's current behavior and any evidence of rehabilitation or changed circumstances. The authorities must consider whether these past incidents indicate a propensity for violence or a disregard for the law that would render the applicant unreliable under the Waffengesetz. This approach aligns with the principle of proportionality and the legal requirement to assess reliability on a case-by-case basis, ensuring that decisions are based on concrete evidence rather than generalizations. An approach that automatically denies the application solely based on the existence of past minor altercations, without further investigation into their nature or the applicant's current suitability, is professionally unacceptable. This fails to adhere to the Waffengesetz's requirement for a comprehensive reliability assessment and could be considered an arbitrary denial. Similarly, an approach that dismisses the altercations as insignificant without considering their potential implications for public safety or the applicant's overall character also falls short. The law requires a proactive assessment of risk, not a passive acceptance of past behavior. Finally, an approach that focuses exclusively on the applicant's stated intent for firearm ownership, without adequately scrutinizing their past conduct and its relevance to reliability, neglects a core component of the Waffenpass application process. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation. This should be followed by a detailed investigation into any concerning aspects of the applicant's history, such as the minor altercations. The assessment of reliability must be objective, considering all relevant factors and applying the criteria set forth in the Waffengesetz. If there is doubt, further inquiry or a personal interview may be necessary to gather sufficient information to make a well-founded decision. The ultimate goal is to ensure that the issuance of a Waffenpass is consistent with both the applicant's rights and the paramount need for public safety. Question 8. Which approach would be most appropriate for an Austrian authority when processing an application for a Waffenpass from an individual who has disclosed past domestic disputes? Option A. Automatically deny the Waffenpass application upon learning of any mention of domestic disputes, regardless of the specific circumstances or the applicant's current disposition. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive background investigation, including verifying the applicant's statements, reviewing police records related to the domestic disputes, and assessing the applicant's current reliability and personal suitability in accordance with the Austrian Waffengesetz. Option C. Prioritize the speed of processing the application over a detailed examination of the applicant's history, focusing only on the most basic documentation requirements. Option D. Accept the applicant's self-declaration regarding the domestic disputes at face value, and proceed with the application without further investigation into the nature or recency of these incidents. Correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive background investigation, including verifying the applicant's statements, reviewing police records related to the domestic disputes, and assessing the applicant's current reliability and personal suitability in accordance with the Austrian Waffengesetz. Explanation: the scenario of an applicant with a history of domestic disputes seeking a Waffenpass in Austria presents a significant professional challenge. The core difficulty lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply for a firearm with the paramount public safety concerns mandated by Austrian firearms law. The authorities must meticulously assess the risk of misuse without unfairly prejudicing the applicant. The best approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment that prioritizes public safety and adherence to the strict requirements of the Austrian Waffengesetz, WAFG. This means conducting a comprehensive background check, including verifying the applicant's statements, obtaining relevant police records, and potentially seeking information from social services or other authorities regarding the domestic disputes. The assessment must focus on whether the applicant demonstrates the necessary reliability, Zuverlässigkeit, and personal suitability, Persönliche, as stipulated by WAFG Section 8 and Section 11. This involves a detailed evaluation of the nature, severity, and recency of the domestic incidents, and whether they indicate a propensity for violence or a lack of self-control that would pose a risk if a firearm were granted. The decision must be based on objective evidence and a reasoned judgment of the applicant's current disposition and future risk. An approach that solely relies on the applicant's self-declaration without independent verification would be professionally unacceptable. This fails to meet the duty of care to the public and ignores the explicit requirement for thorough investigation under WAFG. Similarly, automatically denying the application based solely on the mention of domestic disputes, without a nuanced assessment of the circumstances and the applicant's current suitability, would be an arbitrary and legally unsound decision. It would violate the principle of individualized assessment and could be challenged as discriminatory. Furthermore, an approach that focuses on administrative expediency over substantive safety checks would be a grave ethical and legal failure, potentially leading to the issuance of a Waffenpass to an unsuitable individual. Professionals tasked with these decisions should employ a structured risk assessment framework. This involves clearly defining the criteria for reliability and suitability as per the WAFG, systematically gathering all relevant information, objectively evaluating the evidence against these criteria, and documenting the decision-making process thoroughly. The focus should always be on preventing harm to the public while respecting the applicant's rights within the legal framework. Question 9. Investigation of an application for a Waffenpass in Vienna reveals that the applicant was involved in several documented domestic disputes several years prior, which were resolved without criminal charges being filed. What is the most appropriate course of action for the firearms authority? Option A. Conduct a detailed review of the domestic dispute records to assess the applicant's reliability and suitability for firearm possession, potentially seeking further information if necessary, and make a decision based on the findings and the criteria outlined in the Waffengesetz. Option B. Immediately deny the Waffenpass application due to the history of domestic disputes, as this indicates a potential risk to public safety. Option C. Accept the applicant's written assurance that the disputes were minor and have no bearing on their current character, and proceed with granting the permit. Option D. Grant the Waffenpass application without further investigation, assuming that the absence of criminal charges means the applicant is suitable. The correct answer is A. Conduct a detailed review of the domestic dispute records to assess the applicant's reliability and suitability for firearm possession, potentially seeking further information if necessary, and make a decision based on the findings and the criteria outlined in the Waffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge for an Austrian firearms authority when processing a Waffenpass application for an individual with a history of domestic disputes. The core difficulty lies in balancing the applicant's right to apply for a firearms permit with the paramount public safety interest and the specific requirements of Austrian firearms law, particularly concerning suitability. The authority must meticulously assess the applicant's reliability and the potential risk to public safety, avoiding both undue leniency and arbitrary refusal. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's suitability, directly referencing the provisions of the Austrian Waffengesetz, WAFG. This approach necessitates a detailed review of the domestic dispute records, not merely as a past event, but to understand the context, severity, and any mitigating or aggravating factors. The authority must consider whether the applicant's past behavior demonstrates a lack of reliability or a propensity for violence that would render them unfit to possess a firearm, as stipulated by Section 8 WAFG regarding reliability, Zuverlässigkeit. This includes seeking further information if the existing records are insufficient to make a definitive judgment. The decision must be grounded in objective evidence and the legal criteria for suitability, ensuring due process for the applicant while upholding public safety. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves automatically denying the application solely based on the existence of past domestic disputes, without a nuanced evaluation of the circumstances or the applicant's current situation. This fails to adhere to the principle of individualized assessment required by Austrian law and could be considered an arbitrary refusal, potentially violating the applicant's rights if the disputes did not demonstrate a lack of reliability as defined by the WAFG. Another incorrect approach is to grant the Waffenpass without any further investigation or consideration of the domestic dispute records, assuming that since the legal proceedings concluded, the issue is irrelevant. This approach disregards the explicit requirement under Section 8 WAFG to assess an applicant's reliability, which can be compromised by past behavior, even if not resulting in criminal conviction. It prioritizes administrative expediency over public safety. A further incorrect approach is to rely solely on the applicant's self-declaration that the disputes were minor or resolved, without independently verifying this information or consulting the available records. This approach is professionally negligent as it places undue trust in the applicant's potentially biased account and fails to conduct the due diligence mandated by the WAFG to ensure the applicant is a fit and proper person to possess a firearm. Professional reasoning. Professionals in Austrian firearms authorities must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a comprehensive understanding of the relevant legal framework, primarily the Waffengesetz WAFG, and its specific provisions on reliability and suitability. When faced with information that might impact an applicant's suitability, such as records of domestic disputes, the process should involve 1. Identifying the potential risk to public safety. 2. Gathering all relevant information, including official records and potentially further inquiries. 3. Objectively evaluating this information against the legal criteria for reliability and suitability. 4. Documenting the entire assessment process and the rationale for the final decision. This ensures decisions are legally sound, ethically defensible, and prioritize public safety while respecting individual rights. Question 10. An applicant in Vienna, Austria, is applying for a Waffenpass and has specified that the pass will permit the carrying of a handgun. The base fee for a Waffenpass application is Euros 100. There is a surcharge of Euros 25 for applications that include a handgun. For the current year, administrative fees are subject to a 3% statutory increase. What is the total fee an applicant in Vienna must pay for this Waffenpass application? Option A, Euros 123.75. Option B, Euros 130.00. Option C, Euros 128.75. Option D, Euros 125.00. The correct answer is C, Euros 128.75. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge in accurately calculating the required fees for a Waffenpass application in Austria, specifically concerning the interplay of different fee components and potential surcharges. Miscalculation can lead to administrative delays, applicant dissatisfaction, and potential noncompliance with the Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz. Precise adherence to the fee structure is crucial for efficient processing and maintaining public trust in the administrative process. Correct approach analysis. The correct approach involves a systematic calculation that first determines the base fee for the Waffenpass application, then adds the specific surcharge for the inclusion of a firearm, and finally applies the statutory percentage increase for the current year. This method ensures all mandated components of the fee are accounted for, aligning with the principles of transparency and accuracy in administrative fee collection, as stipulated by Austrian administrative law, and the specific provisions of the Waffengesetz regarding application fees. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves solely calculating the base fee without accounting for the additional surcharge for the firearm. This fails to comply with the specific fee structure outlined for applications that include a firearm, leading to an underpayment of the required administrative fee. Another incorrect approach is to apply the percentage increase to the base fee only, ignoring the surcharge for the firearm. This also results in an underpayment and does not reflect the full cost associated with processing an application for a Waffenpass that permits the carrying of a specific weapon. A further incorrect approach is to add the surcharge for the firearm to the base fee and then apply the percentage increase to the sum of these two amounts, but to incorrectly calculate the percentage increase itself. For example, rounding the percentage incorrectly or using an outdated percentage would lead to a miscalculation. This demonstrates a failure in applying the correct mathematical operations and using the most current statutory rates, which is a fundamental requirement for accurate fee assessment. Professional reasoning. Professionals should approach such calculations by breaking them down into sequential, verifiable steps. First, identify the applicable base fee. Second, determine if any surcharges apply based on the specifics of the application, e.g., inclusion of a firearm. Third, identify the current statutory percentage increase for administrative fees. Fourth, perform the calculations precisely, ensuring correct order of operations and accurate application of percentages. Finally, cross-reference the calculated total with any published fee schedules or guidelines to ensure accuracy and compliance with the Austrian Waffengesetz. Question 11. Strategic planning requires Austrian authorities responsible for issuing Waffenpass to meticulously evaluate an applicant's claim of an urgent need for a firearm. Considering the provisions of the Austrian Waffengesetz, WaffG, which of the following approaches best aligns with the legal and professional obligations for processing such an application? Option A. Issue the Waffenpass immediately upon receiving a credible-sounding statement of fear from the applicant, assuming their subjective apprehension constitutes sufficient urgent need. Option B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's stated need, verifying the credibility of any alleged threats through objective evidence, exploring alternative security measures, and thoroughly assessing the applicant's personal reliability and background against the WaffG criteria. Option C. Deny the application outright due to a general societal concern about the proliferation of firearms, without conducting a detailed assessment of the applicant's specific circumstances or legal eligibility. Option D. Prioritize a subjective assessment of the applicant's perceived character and demeanor over any objective evidence presented regarding the urgency of their need for self-defense. The correct answer is B. Conduct a comprehensive review of the applicant's stated need, verifying the credibility of any alleged threats through objective evidence, exploring alternative security measures, and thoroughly assessing the applicant's personal reliability and background against the WaffG criteria. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm for self-defense against the strict legal requirements and public safety considerations mandated by Austrian weapons law. The issuing authority must exercise careful judgment to ensure compliance with the law while also assessing the genuine necessity and the applicant's suitability, avoiding both undue leniency and arbitrary refusal. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, documented assessment of the applicant's stated need, cross-referencing it with objective evidence and legal criteria. This includes verifying the credibility of the threat, exploring alternative security measures, and meticulously reviewing the applicant's background for any disqualifying factors as per the Waffengesetz, WaffG. The decision must be based on a comprehensive understanding of the legal requirements for demonstrating an urgent need, dringens bedoelfnis, and the applicant's personal reliability, persoonlijk zuverlässigheid. This systematic and evidence-based method ensures adherence to the WAF-G and upholds public safety. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves granting the Waffenpass solely based on the applicant's subjective fear and assertion of a threat, without independent verification or consideration of less restrictive alternatives. This fails to meet the legal threshold for urgent need under Austrian law, which requires more than mere apprehension. It also risks compromising public safety by issuing a firearm without adequate justification. Another incorrect approach is to summarily deny the application based on a generalized concern about firearm ownership, without conducting a proper assessment of the specific circumstances and the applicant's individual situation. This would be an arbitrary refusal, failing to consider the legal provisions that allow for the issuance of a Waffenpass under specific, justified circumstances. It disregards the applicant's right to a fair and legally compliant review process. A further incorrect approach is to focus exclusively on the applicant's perceived character without adequately investigating the objective evidence supporting their claim of an urgent need. While personal reliability is crucial, the law also mandates a demonstrable urgent need. Ignoring the need aspect and solely relying on a subjective assessment of character would be a misapplication of the WAF-G. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this role must adopt a structured decision-making process. This involves 1. Clearly identifying the legal framework Austrian Waffengesetz. 2. Gathering all relevant information from the applicant and any necessary third parties. 3. Objectively evaluating the evidence against the legal criteria for urgent need and personal reliability. 4. Documenting every step of the assessment and the rationale for the decision. 5. Considering all available legal remedies and alternatives before making a final determination. This ensures fairness, legality, and public safety. Question 12. Risk assessment procedures indicate that an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has a history of several minor infractions, including a fine for public intoxication and a warning for minor property damage, occurring over the past 5 years. The applicant states their sole intention for obtaining the Waffenpass is for participation in organized sport shooting events. What is the most appropriate course of action for the licensing authority? Option A. Grant the Waffenpass only after the applicant completes an additional mandatory firearm safety course beyond the standard requirements, as a precautionary measure. Option B. Conduct a detailed, individualized assessment of the applicant's reliability, considering the nature, recency, and context of the infractions in relation to the requirements of the Austrian Weapons Act, Waffengesetz WAF-G, for possessing a firearm for sport shooting. Option C. Automatically deny the application for a Waffenpass due to the presence of any past infractions, irrespective of their severity or relevance to firearm safety. Option D. Issue the Waffenpass immediately, as the applicant's stated purpose of sport shooting is legitimate and the infractions are not directly related to violent crime. The correct answer is B. Conduct a detailed, individualized assessment of the applicant's reliability, considering the nature, recency, and context of the infractions in relation to the requirements of the Austrian Weapons Act, Waffengesetz WAF-G, for possessing a firearm for sport shooting. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires balancing the applicant's stated need for a firearm for sport shooting with the stringent requirements of the Austrian Weapons Act, Waffengesetz WAF-G, concerning the assessment of reliability and the potential for misuse. The applicant's history of minor infractions, while not directly related to violence, raises questions about their overall adherence to legal and societal norms, which is a critical factor in determining suitability for a Waffenpass. The assessor must exercise careful judgment to avoid both unwarranted denial and the issuance of a permit to someone who may pose a risk. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough, individualized assessment of the applicant's reliability, taking into account all available information. This includes a comprehensive review of the applicant's criminal record, any reported incidents, and their stated purpose for seeking a Waffenpass. The assessor must meticulously examine the nature, frequency, and recency of any infractions, evaluating whether they demonstrate a lack of respect for the law or a propensity for irresponsible behavior that could extend to the handling of firearms. This approach aligns with the Austrian WAFG's emphasis on assessing the applicant's Zuverlässigkeit, reliability, which requires a holistic evaluation beyond mere absence of serious criminal convictions. The assessor must also consider the applicant's stated purpose for the Waffenpass, ensuring it is legitimate and aligns with the provisions of the WAFG for sport shooting. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach involves automatically denying the application solely because of the applicant's past minor infractions, regardless of their nature or recency. This fails to adhere to the principle of individualized assessment mandated by the WAFG. The law requires a nuanced evaluation of reliability, not a blanket disqualification based on any past legal issues. Another incorrect approach is to grant the Waffenpass without a deeper investigation into the context and implications of the applicant's infractions. This overlooks the assessor's duty to ensure public safety and uphold the spirit of the WAFG, which aims to prevent firearms from falling into the hands of unreliable individuals. The mere absence of a serious conviction does not automatically equate to reliability. A further incorrect approach would be to focus exclusively on the applicant's stated purpose for the Waffenpass, sport shooting, and disregard any potential concerns arising from their past behavior. While the purpose is relevant, it does not supersede the fundamental requirement to assess the applicant's overall reliability and suitability to possess a firearm. Professional reasoning. Professionals in this field must adopt a systematic decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant legal framework, in this case, the Austrian WAFG. They must then gather all pertinent information about the applicant, including official records and the applicant's own statements. The core of the process involves critically evaluating this information against the legal criteria for reliability, considering the specific circumstances of any past infractions. This requires a balanced judgment, weighing the applicant's right to pursue lawful activities against the imperative to protect public safety. When in doubt, further investigation or consultation with relevant authorities is warranted. Question 13. The assessment process reveals an applicant in Vienna has submitted a request for a Waffenpass, citing a generalized fear for their personal safety due to recent increases in petty crime in their neighborhood. The applicant has provided no specific incidents or evidence to support this fear beyond anecdotal reports, which approach best aligns with the requirements of the Austrian Firearms Act, Waffengesetz, for assessing the genuine need for a firearm. Option A. Issue the Waffenpass based on the applicant's stated fear, as the law should err on the side of protecting citizens who feel vulnerable. Option B. Deny the application immediately, as generalized fears about neighborhood crime do not constitute a legally recognized need for a firearm under Austrian law. Option C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's claims, seeking corroborating evidence of specific threats or a demonstrably heightened risk beyond general societal concerns, and assess their overall suitability and background. Option D. Request additional documentation from the applicant that outlines their proposed methods of self-defense, irrespective of whether a genuine need for a firearm has been established. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough investigation into the applicant's claims, seeking corroborating evidence of specific threats or a demonstrably heightened risk beyond general societal concerns, and assess their overall suitability and background. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a common challenge in Austrian firearms law, the nuanced interpretation and application of the Waffenpass, weapons pass, regulation, particularly concerning the need for a firearm. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires a deep understanding of the Austrian Firearms Act Waffengesetz and its associated ordinances, balancing the applicant's stated reasons against objective criteria and the public interest in safety. Misinterpreting the requirements can lead to either the unlawful issuance of a pass, posing a public safety risk, or the unjustified denial of a legitimate applicant's rights. Careful judgment is required to ensure compliance with the law while upholding principles of fairness and due process. The correct approach involves a thorough, objective assessment of the applicant's stated need, supported by verifiable evidence, and a comprehensive evaluation of their personal circumstances and suitability. This includes scrutinizing the credibility of the applicant's claims, seeking corroborating documentation, and considering any potential risks. The Austrian Firearms Act emphasizes that the need must be demonstrably genuine and not merely a preference or a generalized fear. A responsible authority will conduct due diligence, potentially including interviews and background checks, to ascertain if the applicant's situation genuinely necessitates the possession of a firearm for self-defense or other legally recognized purposes, such as sport shooting or hunting, provided these are properly documented and justified. An incorrect approach would be to grant the Waffenpass based solely on the applicant's subjective assertion of fear, without independent verification or objective evidence. This fails to meet the legal standard of a demonstrable need and disregards the public safety implications of issuing a firearm permit without sufficient justification. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the application summarily based on a generalized suspicion or a broad interpretation of public interest, without engaging in a detailed, individualized assessment of the applicant's specific circumstances and the evidence presented. This could lead to an arbitrary denial of a legitimate request. Finally, accepting unsubstantiated claims or relying on hearsay without proper investigation also constitutes a failure to adhere to the due diligence required by Austrian firearms legislation. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a clear understanding of the legal requirements for obtaining a Waffenpass. This involves meticulously reviewing the applicant's submission, identifying any gaps or inconsistencies, and proactively seeking clarification and supporting evidence. A risk-based approach is crucial, where potential threats are assessed objectively, and the applicant's suitability is evaluated against established criteria. Ethical considerations, such as impartiality and fairness, must guide every step of the process, ensuring that decisions are based on facts and legal provisions, not personal biases. Question 14. The assessment process reveals an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has submitted all standard documentation, but a recent police report details a domestic dispute that, while not resulting in charges, indicates a volatile situation. Considering the legal framework for firearms possession in Austria, which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with the Waffengesetz (WaffG) while upholding professional standards? Option A. Automatically deny the Waffenpass application due to the mention of a domestic dispute in the police report, regardless of the specific circumstances or outcome. Option B. Conduct a formal interview with the applicant to discuss the domestic dispute and assess their current suitability, alongside a thorough review of all submitted documents, including the police report and any relevant medical information. Option C. Rely solely on the police report to make a decision, without engaging the applicant directly or reviewing their medical history, as the report is considered definitive. Option D. Expedite the approval process by approving the application based on the submitted documentation, assuming the absence of formal charges means no further investigation is required. The correct answer is B. Conduct a formal interview with the applicant to discuss the domestic dispute and assess their current suitability, alongside a thorough review of all submitted documents, including the police report and any relevant medical information. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent responsibility of ensuring public safety, while upholding individual rights concerning firearm ownership in Austria. The applicant's history, particularly the recent domestic dispute, necessitates a thorough and objective evaluation that balances the legal requirements for obtaining a Waffenpass with the potential risks to public safety. Careful judgment is required to avoid both undue leniency and unwarranted denial. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, including the applicant's medical records and the police report concerning the domestic dispute, and a direct, formal interview with the applicant to clarify any ambiguities and assess their current disposition. This approach is correct because Austrian firearms law, specifically the Waffengesetz (WaffG), mandates that authorities must be convinced of the applicant's reliability and suitability to possess a firearm. Section 8 of the WaffG outlines the grounds for refusal, including circumstances that raise doubts about the applicant's trustworthiness or potential for misuse. A formal interview allows for direct observation of the applicant's demeanor and provides an opportunity to assess their understanding of their responsibilities and the potential consequences of firearm misuse, thereby fulfilling the legal requirement to ascertain suitability. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the initial application and the police report without further investigation or direct engagement with the applicant. This fails to meet the legal obligation to thoroughly assess suitability as the police report may not provide a complete picture of the applicant's current state of mind or their understanding of firearm safety. Another incorrect approach would be to automatically deny the application based on the domestic dispute alone, without considering the context, the outcome of the dispute, or any mitigating factors or evidence of rehabilitation. This could be seen as an arbitrary denial, not based on a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's current reliability as required by the WAF-G. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediting the process by overlooking potential red flags in the documentation would be professionally unacceptable, as it compromises public safety and violates the spirit and letter of firearms legislation. Professionals should employ a structured decision-making process that begins with a thorough review of all submitted evidence. This should be followed by identifying any areas requiring clarification or further assessment. A formal interview is a critical tool for gathering additional information and assessing the applicant's suitability. The final decision must be based on a holistic evaluation of all gathered information, strictly adhering to the legal criteria outlined in the WAF-G and prioritizing public safety. Question 15. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a firearms enthusiast in Vienna failing to report a change in their residential address to the relevant Austrian firearms authority within the stipulated timeframe. As a licensed firearms dealer in Vienna, what is the most professionally responsible and legally compliant method to mitigate this risk? Option A. Implement a system to proactively remind customers of their obligation to report address changes and offer assistance in the reporting process. Option B. Advise customers that minor address changes are generally not a concern for the authorities and do not require reporting. Option C. Assume customers are aware of and will comply with their legal obligation to report address changes without any dealer intervention. Option D. Require customers to provide extensive official documentation for every address change, regardless of its perceived significance. The correct answer is A. Implement a system to proactively remind customers of their obligation to report address changes and offer assistance in the reporting process. Explanation. The risk matrix shows a moderate likelihood of a firearms enthusiast in Vienna failing to report a change in their residential address to the relevant Austrian firearms authority within the stipulated timeframe. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires the firearms dealer to balance their business operations with strict adherence to Austrian firearms law, specifically the Waffengesetz, WAF-G. Failure to comply can lead to significant penalties for both the individual and the dealer, including potential revocation of licenses and criminal charges. The core of the challenge lies in proactively identifying and addressing potential noncompliance by customers without unduly burdening legitimate owners or creating an overly intrusive process. The best professional approach involves implementing a robust internal system for tracking customer address changes and proactively reminding customers of their reporting obligations. This system should include a mechanism for verifying address changes, perhaps through a simple confirmation request or by cross-referencing with publicly available information where permissible and practical. This proactive stance aligns with the spirit of the WAF-G, which places a strong emphasis on the responsible ownership and tracking of firearms. By actively assisting customers in meeting their legal obligations, the dealer demonstrates due diligence and contributes to public safety, thereby fulfilling their ethical and legal responsibilities under Austrian law. This approach minimizes the risk of unintentional noncompliance by the customer and protects the dealer from accusations of facilitating illegal activities. An incorrect approach would be to assume that customers will automatically comply with their reporting obligations without any prompting. This passive stance ignores the potential for forgetfulness or oversight, which is a common human failing. Legally, the WAF-G places the onus on the firearms owner to report changes, but a responsible dealer should not rely solely on this. Ethically, it falls short of best practice in ensuring compliance and public safety. Another incorrect approach is to implement an overly burdensome verification process that requires extensive documentation for every address change, such as demanding official proof of residency for minor address updates. While thoroughness is important, such a process could alienate customers and create unnecessary administrative hurdles, potentially hindering legitimate transactions and creating a negative customer experience. This approach, while appearing diligent, may not be proportionate to the risk and could be seen as exceeding the reasonable expectations of a firearms dealer under Austrian law. A further incorrect approach is to ignore minor address changes reported by customers, believing them to be insignificant. The WAF-G does not differentiate between significant and minor address changes. Any change in residence must be reported. Ignoring such changes, even if seemingly trivial, constitutes a failure to adhere to the law and could have serious repercussions if discovered during an inspection or investigation. This demonstrates a lack of professional integrity and a disregard for legal requirements. Professionals should employ a risk-based approach, focusing on developing clear internal procedures that are regularly reviewed and updated. This involves understanding the specific legal obligations under the WAF-G, identifying potential points of failure in customer compliance, and implementing proportionate measures to mitigate those risks. Regular training for staff on these procedures and the relevant legal requirements is also crucial. The goal is to create a system that is both legally compliant and practically manageable, fostering a culture of responsibility among both the dealer and their customers. Question 16. Process analysis reveals that an individual in Vienna wishes to apply for a Waffenpass in Austria. What is the most appropriate and legally compliant method for this individual to proceed with their application, ensuring adherence to Austrian firearms legislation? Option A. Provide only basic personal identification and a brief explanation of wanting a firearm for personal protection, without detailing specific training or verifiable reasons, and hope for approval based on perceived need. Option B. Submit an application with a general statement of interest in firearm ownership, assuming the authorities will guide the applicant on any missing requirements during the review process. Option C. Thoroughly research and gather all documentation explicitly required by the Austrian Waffengesetz and its implementing regulations, including proof of a legitimate reason for possession, identity, residency, and demonstrated reliability, and submit a complete application through the official channels. Option D. Rely on advice from friends who have previously obtained firearm permits. Submitting whatever documentation they suggest is sufficient, without independently verifying the current legal requirements. The correct answer is C. Thoroughly research and gather all documentation explicitly required by the Austrian Waffengesetz and its implementing regulations, including proof of a legitimate reason for possession, identity, residency, and demonstrated reliability, and submit a complete application through the official channels. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate a complex administrative process with strict legal requirements for obtaining a Waffenpass in Austria. Misinterpreting or failing to adhere to these requirements can lead to denial of the application, potential legal repercussions, and a significant delay in exercising a lawful right. The onus is on the applicant to demonstrate they meet all criteria, and the authorities have a duty to ensure compliance with the Waffengesetz Weapons Act. Careful judgment is required to ensure all documentation is accurate, complete, and submitted in the correct manner. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves meticulously gathering all required documentation as stipulated by the Austrian Waffengesetz and its implementing regulations. This includes obtaining a valid reason for possessing a firearm, e.g., hunting, sport shooting, collection, providing proof of identity and residency, and demonstrating the necessary reliability and capacity to handle firearms safely. The applicant must also undergo any mandatory training or medical assessments as specified. This approach is correct because it directly addresses and fulfills the explicit legal requirements set forth in Austrian law, ensuring a comprehensive and compliant application. Adhering strictly to the law is paramount for successful and lawful acquisition of a Waffenpass. Incorrect approach is analysis. Submitting an application without a clearly defined and legally recognized reason for firearm possession is professionally unacceptable. Austrian law requires a legitimate purpose for obtaining a Waffenpass. A vague or unsupported claim will lead to rejection and demonstrates a failure to understand the fundamental legal basis for the permit. Providing incomplete or inaccurate personal information, such as incorrect residency details or failing to disclose relevant past incidents that might affect reliability, is also professionally unacceptable. The Waffengesetz places a high emphasis on the applicant's reliability, and any misrepresentation or omission undermines this crucial assessment, potentially leading to severe penalties beyond application denial. Attempting to bypass or expedite the process by submitting incomplete documentation or relying on informal assurances from acquaintances, rather than following the prescribed official procedures, is professionally unacceptable. This approach disregards the formal legal framework and the established administrative processes designed to ensure public safety and lawful firearm ownership, risking outright rejection and potential legal issues. Professional reasoning. Professionals dealing with applications for permits like the Waffenpass in Austria should adopt a systematic, legally driven approach. This involves 1. Thoroughly understanding the specific legal requirements of the Waffengesetz and relevant ordinances. 2. Meticulously preparing all necessary documentation, ensuring accuracy and completeness. 3. Seeking clarification from official sources or legal counsel if any aspect of the process is unclear. 4. Submitting the application through the designated channels and adhering to all procedural guidelines. This structured, compliant approach minimizes risk and maximizes the likelihood of a successful outcome while upholding legal and ethical standards. Question 17. The assessment process reveals an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has a history of reported domestic disputes, though no formal convictions resulted from these incidents. Which of the following approaches best ensures compliance with Austrian weapons law and upholds public safety? Option A. Defer the decision indefinitely, citing the domestic disputes as a reason for prolonged uncertainty without initiating any further investigation. Option B. Approve the Waffenpass application, as the applicant has no criminal convictions and the domestic disputes did not lead to formal charges. Option C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation and proactively investigate the reported domestic disputes by contacting relevant authorities for further information before making a decision. Option D. Inform the applicant that the domestic disputes are a minor issue and proceed with the application without further investigation, assuming they are not relevant to weapons possession. The correct answer is C. Conduct a thorough review of all submitted documentation and proactively investigate the reported domestic disputes by contacting relevant authorities for further information before making a decision. Explanation. The assessment process reveals a scenario that is professionally challenging due to the inherent responsibility associated with firearm ownership and the strict legal framework governing it in Austria. The applicant's history of domestic disputes, even if not resulting in formal convictions, raises significant concerns regarding their suitability to possess a weapon, requiring a thorough and objective evaluation beyond mere procedural compliance. Careful judgment is paramount to ensure public safety and uphold the integrity of the Waffenrat Weapons Act. The correct approach involves a comprehensive review of all submitted documentation, coupled with a proactive investigation into the reported domestic disputes. This includes contacting relevant authorities, such as the police and potentially social services, to gather information on the nature and severity of these incidents. The justification for this approach lies in Section 12 of the Austrian Waffenrat, which mandates that authorities must be satisfied that an applicant is not a risk to public safety. The presence of domestic disputes, even without a conviction, can indicate a propensity for violence or a lack of self-control, making the applicant potentially unsuitable. Ethical considerations also dictate a duty of care to the public, which necessitates a thorough vetting process. An incorrect approach would be to solely rely on the absence of a criminal conviction. This fails to acknowledge that the Waffenrat requires a broader assessment of suitability, not just a check against formal criminal records. Domestic disputes, even if not leading to charges, can be indicative of underlying issues that pose a risk. Another incorrect approach would be to dismiss the domestic dispute allegations outright due to their age or lack of formal charges. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to investigate potential red flags that could impact public safety. Finally, an approach that prioritizes expediency over thoroughness, such as approving the application without further inquiry into the reported disputes, would be a grave ethical and regulatory failure, potentially endangering others. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes public safety and adheres strictly to the spirit and letter of the Waffenrat. This involves a multifaceted approach. First, meticulously reviewing all submitted application materials. Second, identifying any potential risk factors, such as reported disputes. Third, conducting thorough investigations into these risk factors by consulting relevant official sources. And fourth, making a determination based on a holistic assessment of the applicant's suitability, always erring on the side of caution when public safety is at stake. Question 18. What factors determine the successful processing of a Waffenpass application in Austria, considering the specific legal requirements for demonstrating a legitimate need for firearm possession? Option A. A general declaration of intent to own a firearm for personal protection, coupled with a basic understanding of firearm operation. Option B. Submission of a firearms license from another European Union country, assuming automatic recognition in Austria, and a brief personal statement about firearm interest. Option C. Meticulous adherence to the Austrian Waffengesetz, including providing comprehensive documentation of age, mental fitness, a verifiable legitimate reason for possession, such as sport shooting or hunting, and proof of safety training, submitted to the correct administrative authority. Option D. Providing only proof of identity and age, with the expectation that the authorities will investigate the applicant's suitability independently, without further applicant input. Correct answer is C. Meticulous adherence to the Austrian Waffengesetz, including providing comprehensive documentation of age, mental fitness, a verifiable legitimate reason for possession, such as sport shooting or hunting, and proof of safety training, submitted to the correct administrative authority. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario is professionally challenging because it requires an applicant to navigate a complex administrative process with potentially significant consequences for noncompliance. The Waffenpass application process in Austria involves demonstrating a legitimate need for a firearm, undergoing background checks, and proving proficiency. Misinterpreting or failing to adequately address the requirements can lead to denial, impacting the applicant's ability to engage in lawful activities like sport shooting or hunting. The challenge lies in accurately presenting all necessary documentation and fulfilling all stipulated conditions within the legal framework. Correct approach analysis. The best professional approach involves a thorough understanding and meticulous adherence to the specific requirements outlined in the Austrian Waffengesetz, Weapons Act, and relevant administrative guidelines. This means proactively gathering all required documentation, such as proof of identity, proof of age, a medical certificate confirming mental fitness, evidence of a legitimate reason for possessing a firearm, e.g., membership in a shooting club, hunting license, and proof of firearm safety training. It also entails submitting the application to the correct authority, typically the Bezirkshauptmannschaft or Landespolizeidirektion, within the prescribed timeframe, and ensuring all information provided is accurate and verifiable. This approach is correct because it directly addresses the legal obligations and evidentiary standards set forth by Austrian law, minimizing the risk of rejection due to procedural errors or insufficient proof. Incorrect approaches analysis. One incorrect approach is to assume that a general statement of intent to own a firearm for self-defense is sufficient justification. Austrian law requires a specific, demonstrable, and legitimate reason that is not primarily for personal defense, which is generally not considered a valid justification for a Waffenpass. This approach fails to meet the evidentiary burden stipulated by the Waffengesetz and would likely result in denial. Another incorrect approach is to submit incomplete documentation, such as omitting the medical certificate or proof of firearm safety training. The Waffengesetz explicitly mandates these documents as essential components of a valid application. Failure to provide them demonstrates a lack of diligence and disregard for the legal requirements, leading to rejection. A further incorrect approach is to apply to the wrong administrative authority or to provide misleading information about previous firearm-related incidents. The Waffengesetz designates specific authorities responsible for processing Waffenpass applications, and any attempt to circumvent this process or falsify information would constitute a serious regulatory and ethical violation, leading to immediate denial and potential legal repercussions. Professional reasoning. Professionals involved in assisting applicants for a Waffenpass in Austria should adopt a systematic and legally compliant process. This involves 1. Thoroughly researching and understanding the current provisions of the Austrian Waffengesetz and any implementing decrees. 2. Conducting a detailed consultation with the applicant to ascertain their specific circumstances and legitimate reasons for seeking a Waffenpass. 3. Guiding the applicant in gathering all necessary, up-to-date documentation, ensuring its accuracy and completeness. 4. Submitting the application to the designated authority with all supporting evidence. 5. Maintaining open communication with the applicant and the authorities throughout the process. This structured approach ensures that all legal requirements are met, thereby maximizing the likelihood of a successful application and upholding professional integrity. Question 19. Compliance review shows an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has disclosed a history of seeking professional help for anxiety-related issues 5 years prior to their application. What is the most appropriate next step for the issuing authority? Option A. Issue the Waffenpass provisionally, while initiating a lengthy investigation into the applicant's past medical records without their explicit consent. Option B. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's disclosed information, potentially seeking further clarification or a medical opinion if deemed necessary by the authority, to assess current suitability and reliability in accordance with the Austrian Waffengesetz. Option C. Disregard the disclosed information as irrelevant to the applicant's current fitness to possess a firearm, proceeding directly to approval. Option D. Immediately reject the application, as any history of mental health treatment automatically disqualifies an individual from obtaining a Waffenpass under Austrian law. The correct answer is B. Conduct a thorough review of the applicant's disclosed information, potentially seeking further clarification or a medical opinion if deemed necessary by the authority, to assess current suitability and reliability in accordance with the Austrian Waffengesetz. Explanation. Scenario analysis. This scenario presents a professional challenge due to the inherent tension between an individual's right to privacy and the legal obligations of an authority to ensure public safety through regulated firearm ownership. The applicant's disclosure of a past mental health concern, while potentially sensitive, is directly relevant to the assessment of their suitability for a Waffenpass in Austria. The challenge lies in balancing thorough due diligence with respect for the applicant's personal information and avoiding undue prejudice. Careful judgment is required to ensure the assessment is objective, fair, and strictly adheres to the Austrian Waffengesetz, WAFG. Correct approach analysis. The best professional practice involves a systematic and legally compliant review of the provided information, seeking clarification where necessary, and consulting relevant legal provisions. This approach prioritizes adherence to the Austrian WAFG, which mandates a comprehensive assessment of the applicant's reliability and suitability. Specifically, Section 12 of the WAFG outlines the grounds for refusal, including circumstances that raise doubts about the applicant's trustworthiness or mental capacity. Therefore, a thorough review, including seeking a medical opinion if deemed necessary by the authorities based on the disclosed information, is the correct path. This ensures that the decision is based on objective criteria and legal requirements, rather than assumptions or incomplete information. Incorrect approach is analysis. One incorrect approach involves immediately rejecting the application based solely on the mention of past mental health treatment. This fails to acknowledge the legal framework which requires an assessment of current suitability and reliability, not just past events. The WAFG does not automatically disqualify individuals based on historical health issues. Rather, it requires an evaluation of whether these issues currently impact their fitness to possess a firearm. This approach risks discrimination and a failure to apply the law as written. Another incorrect approach is to dismiss the disclosed information as irrelevant without further investigation. This is professionally negligent and a direct contravention of the WAFG's intent. The authorities have a duty to assess all information that could bear on the applicant's suitability. Ignoring potentially significant disclosures undermines the public safety mandate and the integrity of the Waffenpass issuance process. A third incorrect approach is to proceed with issuing the Waffenpass without any further inquiry or consideration of the disclosed mental health information. This demonstrates a lack of due diligence and a failure to uphold the responsibilities mandated by Austrian law. The purpose of the Waffenpass is to ensure that only responsible and trustworthy individuals are permitted to own firearms. Overlooking relevant information directly compromises this objective. Professional reasoning. Professionals tasked with reviewing Waffenpass applications in Austria must adopt a structured decision-making process. This begins with a thorough understanding of the relevant sections of the Waffengesetz (WAFG), particularly those pertaining to applicant suitability and grounds for refusal. When sensitive information is disclosed, the process should involve 1. Acknowledging the disclosure and its potential relevance. 2. Consulting the WAFG to determine the legal implications of such disclosures. 3. If necessary, seeking further information or clarification from the applicant or relevant professionals, e.g., medical practitioners, with appropriate consent or legal basis. 4. Making a decision based on the totality of the evidence, assessed against the legal criteria for suitability and reliability. This systematic approach ensures fairness, legal compliance, and the protection of public safety. Question 20. The evaluation methodology shows that an applicant for a Waffenpass in Austria has submitted all required documentation. The administrative fee for processing the application is calculated based on a base fee of Euros 30 plus an additional Euros 2 for each page of supporting documentation submitted, up to a maximum of 15 pages. If the applicant has submitted 12 pages of supporting documentation, what is the total administrative fee payable? Option A, Euros 60. Option B, Euros 50. Option C, Euros 30. Option D, Euros 54. Correct answer is D, Euros 54. Explanation. The evaluation methodology shows that managing the financial implications of firearm ownership, particularly concerning the Austrian Waffenpass, requires a precise understanding of applicable fees and their calculation. This scenario is professionally challenging because it involves statutory fees that are not always straightforward and can be subject to specific interpretations or administrative practices. Accurate calculation is paramount to ensure compliance with Austrian administrative law and to avoid potential penalties or delays in processing applications. The correct approach involves meticulously calculating the total fee based on the current statutory rates for the Waffenpass application, including any potential ancillary charges as stipulated by the relevant Austrian administrative regulations. This approach is correct because it directly adheres to the legal framework governing the Waffenpass, ensuring that the applicant is charged the precise amount mandated by law. This upholds the principle of legality and administrative fairness. An incorrect approach would be to estimate the fee based on past experience or general knowledge of administrative costs without consulting the most up-to-date fee schedule. This fails to comply with the specific statutory requirements for the Waffenpass fee, potentially leading to undercharging, which is an administrative error and could have implications for the authority, or overcharging, which is unfair to the applicant and may be legally challengeable. Another incorrect approach would be to apply a flat fee without considering any variable components or specific circumstances that might influence the final amount, as dictated by Austrian administrative procedures. This disregards the detailed fee structure established by law. Professionals should employ a decision-making framework that prioritizes consulting official, current fee schedules and relevant administrative guidelines for the Waffenpass. This should be followed by a step-by-step calculation using the provided figures, ensuring all applicable components are included. If any ambiguity exists, seeking clarification from the responsible administrative authority is the next crucial step before finalizing any financial assessment.